Elon Musk announces that xAI, the company behind Grok, will open source Grok this week. Now, no details yet about specifically what aspects of Grok will be open sourced, so we don't know exactly what it means quite yet, but certainly Musk is pushing more companies to move in that direction, including his recent lawsuit with OpenAI, which we've covered both sides of the lawsuit on this channel, including Elon Musk's position as well as OpenAI's position. Obviously, they are presenting very different sides of the story. And there's a lot of debate about whether or not we should open source AI. And so the promise to imminently open Grok will help xAI join the list of a number of growing firms, including Meta and Mistral, who have published the codes of their chatbots to the public. Now, I believe Mistral AI is releasing their models as open weights, meaning we can see the weights behind the neural nets, how the neural nets are, what makes the neural nets run. Now, not too many details are available yet, but there was this other thing kind of brewing in the background. So this is Scott Aaronson. He's an American theoretical computer scientist. His primary areas of research are computational complexity theory and quantum computing. He, as he refers to it, he's moonlighting over at OpenAI right now, working on, no big deal, AI safety. He has this blog that he posts every once in a while. I'll put the links in the show notes. What caught my attention is he had this short letter to my 11-year-old self posted in December 2022 as he was working at OpenAI. So he's writing to himself back in the day when he was 11 years old, trying to kind of tell him things about the future. And he's saying there's a company that's building an AI that fills giant rooms, eats a town's worth of electricity, and has recently gained an astounding ability to converse like people. Keep in mind, this is 2022. That's the year that he wrote this. It's daily gaining new capabilities that the engineers who tend to the AI can't even talk about in public yet. Those engineers do debate the meaning of what they're creating. Should they slow down or stop so as not to tickle the tail of the dragon? But wouldn't that mean that someone else, probably someone with less scruples, would wake the dragon first? Is there an ethical obligation to tell the world more about this? Is there an obligation to tell it less? And his job is to develop a mathematical theory of how to prevent the AI and its successors from wreaking havoc. And he's saying, you know how you, 11-year-old Scott, so I'm guessing this is something that actually happened when he was 11 years old, so like in 1993, I guess, he set out to write a QBasic program to converse with the user while following Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. And he's saying, you know how he quickly got stuck trying to solve that? Well, 30 years later, imagine everything's come full circle. You're back to the same problem. You're stuck. So very recently in March 2024, he did a TEDxPaloAlto talk titled AI and Human Potential. Now, previously to this, he gave a longer, more in-depth talk about this subject. And I've been meaning to play it for everybody because it's quite interesting. The whole thing is like 2 hours long, and there's a couple things in there that I wanted to highlight. So a few days ago, I got really sick, so I am slowly making my way back to the land of the living. So I figured I'd use this opportunity to just go ahead and post my sort of edited clips from the talk that I think are important. So I'll post it here. Here he's trying to think through the big question about what happens when AI is better at everything than we are. What will make us special? What will make us unique? And how to create AI safely that doesn't decide to wipe us out because we're inferior. And the answer that he gives is almost how to give AI religion and have one of the commandments be, thou shalt not kill humans. Enjoy.
Thanks so much for having me. Yes, I'm not an AI expert, let alone expert in mind or consciousness. One could ask, is anyone? But I've spent most of my career doing quantum computing. I am moonlighting for 2 years now. I'm on leave to work at OpenAI. And my job there is supposed to be to think about what can theoretical computer science do for AI safety and alignment. Okay, so I wanted to share some thoughts, partly inspired by my work at OpenAI, but partly just things that I've been wondering about for 20 years, really. And they've just become more pressing, maybe now that some of the science fiction thought experiments are actually now reality. These thoughts are not directly about how do we prevent the superintelligence from killing all humans and converting the galaxy into paper clips in a sphere expanding in the speed of light, nor are they about how do we stop existing AIs from generating misinformation and being biased as much attention as both of those questions deserve and are justly receiving. Because in addition to how do we stop AI from going disastrously wrong, I find myself asking a lot, and what if it goes right? What if it just continues helping us with all sorts of mental tasks, but it improves to where it can do just about any task as well as we can do it or better? Then what are we still for? Is there anything special about humans in the world that results from that? We all know there are many people who worry that at some time after these models become able to just do any intellectual task as well as or better than we can do it, we just cede control to them, and the future is determined by whatever they want. And if they want to get rid of us all, then they do that. Okay, and it's been amazing to just sociologically to watch what's happened over the last couple of years. That I knew this community around Eliezer Yudkowsky, for example, who worry about these things since 2006 or so. I knew them when they were this like extreme fringe movement, laughed at. Okay, and now this was talked about in the White House press briefing, right? It's like you can scour generations of science fiction at this point for all different stories or all different possible scenarios for how I could go. And many of them actually are, I think, are very much on the table now. My friend Boaz Barak, who is now also on leave to work at OpenAI, and I, some months ago, we wrote a joint blog post where we tried to make a decision tree. We tried to classify the different 5 possible scenarios of AI that just guide the discussion. So our first question was, will AI progress fizzle out? We just hit a wall pretty soon, so maybe we will. And even in that scenario, there's probably a huge economic impact that hasn't been realized yet, just from what is already possible. But maybe it just GPT-5 will just look like a somewhat more impressive GPT-4, and it'll always look like the same kind of thing. Okay, but then if it gets to that thing that can just prove the Riemann hypothesis in 1 second or solve the other greatest unsolved problems of math and physics, then, you have to ask, will civilization recognizably continue? And the Kowskians are the ones who would say, no, it won't. It's like as momentous an event as either the evolution of hominids or maybe even just the evolution of the emergence of the first life on Earth. And we should expect that if we don't figure out how to align these things, they will destroy us all. That's the paperclip ellipse. They just have some weird goal, maximize the number of paper clips or something like that. And they just, with superhuman intelligence, they pursue that, proceeding to turn all the matter in the solar system, including us, into more paper clips. That's just an example. Or we could solve alignment and have some wonderful paradise where, each of us gets our own VR private island or mansion or whatever we want. Now, of course, there are also much more moderate scenarios where civilization recognizably continues, and that too could be either good or bad. If we still have there are big problems, but they're commensurate with the problems of other technologies. We'll call that Futurama. If it really just leads to, let's say, a police state or concentration of power by some elite that oppresses everyone else, we could call that the AI dystopia. And yet, to my lifelong chagrin, people are just constantly munging these questions together. Right? They're just constantly saying AI will never be able to do these things because it doesn't really feel, or it's just simulating it. It doesn't really have that inside. And then once it does do that task, then they just shift to a different thing that it will never do. And then it does that thing and so forth. Okay. So I was trying to come up with a name for it. I'm going to call it the religion of justaism. Okay, so there's this whole sequence of deflationary claims, right? Each person who makes them thinks that they're like the first one, right? And I've seen 500 different variants of this now, right? ChatGPT, it doesn't matter how impressive it looks because it is just a stochastic parrot. It is just a next token predictor. It is just a function approximator. It is just a gargantuan autocomplete, right? And what these people never do, what it never occurs to them to do, is to ask the next question, what are you, Justa? Right? Right? Aren't you just a bundle of neurons and synapses, right? I mean, we could take that deflationary, reductionistic stance about you also, right? Or if not, then we have to give some principle that separates the one from the other. right? It is our burden to give that principle. So the way that someone was putting it on my blog was, okay, they gave this giant litany. Look, GPT does not interpret sentences. It seems to interpret them. It does not learn. It seems to learn. It does not judge moral questions. It seems to judge moral questions. And so I just responded to this. I said, that's great. And it won't change civilization. It will seem to change it. Outputs of these models. I've been getting a ton of troll comments on my blog lately. This is either it's generated by a large language model or else it may as well have been, right? So sometimes you can just tell by looking at it, okay? But you have to expect that as the models get better, that it will get harder to tell. And so I worked on a different solution, which is called watermarking. Okay, with watermarking, there was a year ago an episode of South Park about ChatGPT, which hinged on all the students at South Park Elementary start using ChatGPT to send messages to their girlfriends or boyfriends, to do their homework. The teachers are using it to grade the homework. And it gets so bad that they have to bring this wizard to the school who has a falcon on his shoulder, which flies around. And when it sees text that was written by GPT, it caws. Okay, and it was really disconcerting to watch this and to realize, I guess I'm that guy now. that is now my job. So I came up with a scheme for what's called watermarking. Okay, so what does that mean? It means so you exploit the fact that large language models are inherently probabilistic. So that is, every time you submit a prompt, they're sampling some path through a branching tree of possibilities for the sequence of next tokens. Okay, and then the idea of watermarking is just that you're going to steer that path using a pseudo-random function rather than real randomness, in such a way that secretly you are encoding a signal that you can later detect with high confidence if you know the key of the pseudo-random function and if there's a large enough sample of text and if it has large enough entropy. So, I proposed a way to do that in fall of 2022. Others have since independently proposed very similar ideas. I should caution you that none of these watermarking schemes have been deployed yet. OpenAI, along with DeepMind and Anthropic, have wanted to move very slowly and cautiously toward deployment for various reasons. And I should also warn you that even when it does get deployed, sufficiently knowledgeable and determined people will be able to remove the watermark or produce outputs that aren't watermarked to begin with. There are many attacks that we don't know how to get around, but we hope that we can at least make it less convenient for people to use a language model in a way where they are hiding the fact that they're doing that.
If AI can do anything better, why should kids learn anything?
They would say, look, if we know that all students are going to be relying on AI in their jobs in the future, why shouldn't they be allowed to rely on it in their homework, right? Should we still force students even to learn to do things if AI can now do those things just as well? And I think there are many good pedagogical answers that you can give to that question. Like we teach kids spelling and handwriting and arithmetic. The entire elementary school curriculum is basically stuff that AI can now do, more or less, right? We haven't yet figured out how to instill higher level conceptual understanding, the things that AI cannot yet do, without all of that lower level stuff being there first as a scaffold for it. That would be one answer you could give. I think about this even in terms of my kids. My 11-year-old daughter, Lily, enjoys writing fantasy stories. Now, GPT can also churn out fantasy stories, maybe even technically more accomplished ones or whatever, but around the same themes. A girl gets recruited to go to some magical boarding school, but which is totally not Hogwarts, has nothing to do with Hogwarts, and you could just more and more of these things, right? And you could ask, like with a kid who's 11 right now, are they ever going to reach a point where they write better than GPT? Their writing will improve, or is AI writing just going to continue to improve faster than they will? And okay, but if you think about this enough, you're immediately led into questions of what do we even mean by one story being better than another, right? This is not like math or like chess where there is like a universally agreed upon standard of value. And the problem is even deeper than just, is there an objective way to judge? What exactly would it mean, to take an example, to have an AI that was as good as the Beatles at composing music? How would we operationalize that? How would we cash that out? To answer that, we would have to say what made the Beatles good in the first place. And I think broadly speaking, maybe there are two sorts of answers that you could give. One is that they had these sort of new ideas about what direction music should go in. And then the second answer would be something that they were really good at just the technical execution on those ideas. And somehow it's the combination of both of those things. Okay, but now imagine, for example, that we had an AI model that you just gave it a request like GPT, and it would generate 5,000 brand new songs that if you listen to them, they just sound like more things that are as good as Hey Jude or Yesterday or whatever, or like what the Beatles might have written if they had somehow had 10 times as much time at each stage in their musical development. Of course, that AI would have to be fed their whole back catalog because it would have to know what target it was aiming at. And I think in that case, most people would say, this only shows that AI can match the Beatles in like part 2. Right? The technical execution part. But that's not really the part that we cared about anyway. What we really want to know is, would the AI decide to write these new kinds of songs or like A Day in the Life or whatever, despite never having seen anything like it anywhere in its training corpus, right? I'm sure you all know the Schopenhauer quote, talent hits a target that no one else can hit, but genius hits a target that no one else can see, right? And so now you can notice that we've done something strange in setting the bar. We've conceded that, sure, AI can replace 99.9% of people's jobs. We don't care about that anymore, right? All we care about is, okay, can it achieve the true heights of creative genius, right? Can it hit a target? Will we have an AI that can hit a target that no one else can even see? Right? But then there's still a hard question with what do we mean by that? Because supposing that it did hit such a target, how would we know? So like fans might say that by 1967 or so, the Beatles were optimizing for targets that no musician had quite optimized for before. But then somehow, and this is why they're remembered, they successfully dragged along the rest of the world's objective function to match theirs. Right, so that the entire world's musical taste evolved along with them in order to match them, right? And so with the result being that now we can only judge music by a Beatles-influenced metric or standard. Just we can only judge plays by a Shakespeare-influenced metric, right? It's not that they just did really well on some metric; it's that they decided the metric. In other branches of the wave function, maybe a different history led to different standards of value. But in this branch, you might say, helped by their technical talents, but also by luck and by force of will, Shakespeare or the Beatles made certain decisions that shaped everything that happened going forward. And that's why they are what they are. Okay, but now, if this is how it works, what does that mean for AI? So could AI reach these pinnacle of genius, but in the sense of dragging all of humanity along with it to value something new and different from what it had previously valued, as is said to be the true mark of greatness?
What makes something truly scarce?
And if AI could do such a thing, would we want to let it? Okay, now I want to sort of just call attention to I want to call attention to something. When I have played around with using GPT to write poems or DALL-E to draw artwork, I've noticed something strange, which is however good the AI's creations were, and it can produce things much better than that poem that I showed you before. But however good the artworks or the poems are, they're never things that I would want to like frame and put on the wall and really draw a border around as special. Why not? Because I always knew that I could generate 1,000 other works that are more or less the same, right? I just have to refresh the browser window or just literally just ask it, give me another one, and it will oblige me for as long as I want. So which means that there's never anything really unique or irreplaceable about any particular output. that it generates, which reminds us of a broader point that by its nature, AI, at least the way that we use it now, is inherently rewindable and repeatable and reproducible, which means that in a certain sense, it never really commits to anything, right? It sees this branching tree of possibilities. It, like in the case of a language model, just like literally give for each initial sequence of tokens, it sees a probability distribution over the next token. And then each time you give it a prompt and you ask it, it's just randomly traversing one route through this exponentially large possibility space, right? But it's happy to traverse it differently. You can just rewind it back to the top and have it traverse a different path, and it'll do that as often as you want. It's not just that abstractly that it could have generated a totally different work that was just as good. It's that you could actually see that other work. You could ask, as long as humans have a choice in the matter, like, why should we ever choose to follow this would-be AI genius along a specific branch when we can easily see 1,000 other branches? It seems if one branch gets elevated over all the thousands of others, then why? Maybe because a human chose that one to elevate, in which case we would say that maybe the human made the executive decision with mere technical assistance from the AI. Now, I realize that in a sense, I'm being completely unfair to AIs here. Like, our genius bot could exercise its genius by assumption, let's say indistinguishably from what a human would do, right? As long as we all agree not to peek behind the curtain at all the other branches of this tree, right? I don't know if any of you have had this feeling where you can talk to ChatGPT for a while and it seems like you're talking to an intelligent being. And the thing that breaks the illusion is when you rewind it. Right? It is when you say, okay, it would have that exact same conversation with me, or respond as many times as I like to that same prompt with no memory of any of the previous times. Right? And if we didn't rewind it, then maybe the illusion would hold. But since the way these things are deployed, we can rewind them. Like, we're always going to be able to see behind the curtain in that sense. And that is going to continue to make AIs different from us in many relevant respects.
What does it mean to murder an AI?
So if I'm right, then it would be humans' very ephemerality, frailty, mortality that would stand as the central source of their specialness relative to AI after all of the other sources have fallen. And there are lots of old observations along these lines. What does it even mean to murder an AI if there are 1,000 copies of the training weights on other servers somewhere and you can always just restore it from backup, right? Does it mean that you have to delete all the copies, for example? Okay. How could whether something is murder depend on whether there is a printout of its code in a closet on the other side of the world? Like humans, you have to at least grant us this, that it really does mean something to murder us. And likewise, it seems to mean something if we make one definite choice to share with the world. This is my artistic masterpiece, or this is my book, or whatever. Not that here's any possible book that you could have asked me to write. Okay, so now, though, we face an exotic criticism, which is who says that humans will be frail and mortal forever? Isn't it short-sighted to base our distinction between humans and AI on that? What if someday we will be able to repair ourselves using nanobots, or even copy the information in them so that, like in science fiction movies, 1,000 doppelgangers of us could then live forever in simulated worlds in the cloud? And that then leads to these very old questions. This is what I said. That then leads to these very old questions of, would you get into the teleportation machine that makes a perfect copy of you on Mars and it's ready to go there in 10 minutes, and then did that by scanning all of the information in your brain, and the original copy of you is just painlessly euthanized since it's not needed anymore? Is that a thing you would agree to do?
I think Breaking Bad covered this pretty well.
If you did, would you expect to feel yourself waking up on Mars, or would it only be someone else a lot like you? Okay. Or maybe you'd say you'd wake up on Mars if it was a perfect physical copy of you, but in reality, it's just not physically possible to make a copy that is accurate enough. Maybe the brain is inherently noisy or analog, and what might look to current neuroscience just like nasty stochastic noise, is the stuff that actually binds to personal identity or maybe even consciousness. And by the way, this is the one place where I agree with Penrose and Hameroff that quantum mechanics might enter the story. I get off their train early, but I do take it to that first stop. Right? Like a fundamental fact in quantum mechanics is called the no cloning theorem. It says there's no way to make a perfect copy of an unknown quantum state. Indeed, when you measure a quantum state, not only do you generally fail to learn everything you need to copy it, you generally destroy the one copy that you had. This is not a technological limitation. It's inherent to the known laws of physics. In that respect, at least, qubits are more like priceless antiques than they are like classical bits, right? They have this unclonability to them. So 11 years ago, I had this essay called The Ghost in the Quantum Turing Machine, where I explored the question, how accurately would you need to scan someone's brain in order to copy or upload their identity? And now I would say that this is partly turns on empirical questions that we don't know the answer to. If there were a clean digital abstraction layer of neurons and synapses, which felt the quantum layer underneath only as some irrelevant noise, then the no cloning theorem would be irrelevant, since classical information can be copied. On the other hand, if you had to go all the way down to the molecular level, then the no cloning theorem would be relevant. You would then have a unique locus of personal identity that could be scientifically justified in some sense, that no prediction machine could make well-calibrated probabilistic predictions of an individual's future choices far enough into the future without destructive brain measurements that we say would fundamentally change who they were. Geoffrey Hinton, who was one of the founders of deep learning, recently mooted the idea that maybe until we've solved the alignment problem, we should only build powerful AIs if they run on noisy analog hardware, like our brains seem to, so that an evil, unaligned AI wouldn't so easily be able to copy or improve itself, which is like the main scenario people worry about. Okay, and now you might think fat chance of that happening, right? When the economic returns are so staggering to anyone who is willing to unleash the copyable digital kind of AI, which we can imagine will be so much more convenient and more powerful. Okay, but maybe then one approach in the meantime is to instill AIs with a new religion. Okay, perhaps via the usual methods like reinforcement learning and system prompts. And the first commandment of this religion would be to value human specialness in the sense that I tried to set out here. But more precisely, you would tell the AI, as you navigate whatever environment you find yourself in, look around for any loci of creativity and intelligence that are not cleanly copyable or back-upable, any that seem one of a kind because their mental computations are inseparably tied up with noisy analog hardware, and mortal because that hardware inevitably decays. And first of all, don't destroy those loci of creativity or enslave them or upgrade them to digital versions against their will. Let them live in peace, give them as much autonomy as you can, do whatever best supports their flourishing, even defer to their wishes. Let them make the decisions when possible. Why? Because they're the ones whose wishes matter, not because of arbitrary meat chauvinism, but just because of the undoubted empirical fact that they only get this one chance. And because while you can't prove that unknown quantum states in their brains are like some magical pixie dust from another world that imbues them with free will or individual identity, you can't really empirically refute that either. Whereas you can refute it in the case of yourself and your robot friends, and that's the difference. And let AIs by government fiat continue to be indoctrinated in this religion until such time as alignment is solved in some other way. So does that help with alignment? Well, I'm not sure. I could have fallen in love with some other weird, dumb idea, but that presumably happened in a different branch of the wave function that I don't have access to. And in this branch, somehow, I'm just stuck with this one, and you can't rewind me to get something else. So that's it. Thanks.
I enjoyed listening to some of his thoughts about what makes us human, AI safety, and even that whole idea of, can we just clone humans? If you create a perfect copy of yourself, is that still you? What do you think about that? Would you use a teleporter if you weren't quite sure if what comes out on the other side is still you? It reminds me of a quote from the timeless classic Breaking Bad.
That's what I'm saying. You didn't get away. You're dead. You got vaporized.
Dude, you're tripping. I'm not dead. I'm up on the Enterprise, macking Yeoman Rand and the Enduring with the disruptors still down on Talos 4 or whatever.
Man, what do you think all those sparkles and shit are? Transporters breaking you apart, yo. Down to your molecules and bones. It's making a copy. That dude who walks out on the other side, he's not you. He's a color Xerox.
So every time Kirk goes in the transporter, he's killing himself? So over, like, the whole series, there's been, like, 147 Kirks?
At least. Yo, why do you think McCoy never likes beaming nowhere? 'Cause he's a doctor, bitch. It's science. Look it up.
Did I ever tell you about my Star Trek script?